This video is going to be a discussion on Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Birthmark and James Joyce's Eveline. Both of these authors really try to convey a main idea of character development, of the message of sacrifice, the meaning of that, and having to face reality. They do it in different ways, but they both try to reach the same message of sacrifice and the consequences of your choices. Nathaniel Hawthorne in The Birthmark is about a newlywed couple, mainly a scientist named Almer, who really focuses on trying to divide spirit from matter in the earthly world. He believes that his science can be some kind of magic and overcome the power of human nature and God's creation of humans and flaws within that. He really does a lot of experience with that. He has an assistant who happens to be a foil to him, who is a Minidab. A Minidab is seen as a physical being, kind of like a man of clay, which Almer refers to as a human machine. Almer himself is seen as the mind, intelligence, more than the physical state. They work in the laboratory together, and he ends up giving up his science for the new love that he found, Georgina. He finds this beautiful woman, and he decides that this love can be just as good as his science. However, that becomes a major issue when his passion for science starts to overcome his love for Georgiana. They are married, and she happens to have a birthmark the shape of a crimson red hand on her cheek. And he ends up seeing this as a flaw. He says, "You're beautiful, you're perfect, I love you, but you have this on your cheek, and it's your one flaw, and we should get rid of that." She disagrees. She kind of believes that that's a part of her, that's who she is. But with Almer's obsession, he soon can no longer talk to her. He can't look at her without wanting to turn away, and that really hurts Georgiana, and she ends up almost pleading him to remove it more than supporting him in the act of it, because she is just obsessed. She just wants their marriage and their love to work. So Almer resides back to his laboratory with his assistant and trying to come up with something that can remove this terrible birthmark from her face. And Georgiana's waiting, and as she does, she comes across his old journals and experiments that he has done, and she realizes that none of them were successful, pretty much, and that this one is going to be the same, and that he will not be able to heal her of this terrible flaw that she has. She ponders about it, and she actually falls more in love with him, seeing his passion for science and the ability that he has to do this work. But in doing so, she understands that the reality of her situation is not good and that it will not end positively. She then also understands that if she does not go through with this, it will not only upset Almer and their marriage will not work, but when he fails, it will upset him even more. So she accepts the consequences of that. She almost acts like a martyr for the love that she has for him, because she knows that if this fails, then he's going to be gone, because his love really relies within science. I mean, that connected them. He thought he was giving it up for her, but in all reality, he connected the two together and unifying it. So she goes along with it, and he almost compares himself to a higher being, that he says, "You can worship me once this is successful." So he ends up finding something, and he makes it, and he gives it to her to drink, and she takes it, and in the end she does pass away. And he sacrificed his wife and the new family and the love he had for her with that for his science, because that was just so overwhelmingly powerful within him. And I think what Hawthorne was really trying to get across here is that it's the sacrifices we need to make. Liz Rosenberg, actually a critic of his work, did some research, and at the time she found that he was engaged whenever he wrote this story. And this really gives a purpose to why he wrote it, as to expressing his own hopes and desires and fears within his new coming marriage, but also an expression of sacrifice, and that he believes happiness is reality. And the reality is that we are all imperfect and we have mistakes, which Almer could not see. and Georgiana. He could not see past her mistakes for the love that they had. And he believes that the happiness is realizing that and moving past it. I think it's really showing his desire for his own marriage at the time. But on a different note, James Joyce writes Eveline, who's about a girl. It starts out, she's a young girl, and she has 2 other brothers and her parents. And they play outside and just normal stuff. And as she grows older, her mother ends up passing away. Before the time when she was sick, she made a promise with her mother that she would take care of the family for as long as she could. One of her other brothers ends up passing away also. Her father becomes a bit of an alcoholic and slightly abusive, more in a mental way than physical. He would get intoxicated and just yell at her for everything, and money was a big issue, and he just blamed her for it. She still tried to keep up and take care of everything, and this just pressed her further to dream of a new life, of falling in love with that, and a new area and setting where she would be respected, and just a new beginning. She ends up meeting a sailor, Frank, who comes into town, and they fall in love, and he is able to give her the possibility of a new life and that new setting, just a new beginning. He's able to give her that where they can sail away. And I think she falls more in love with the idea of this and the fact that he's able to give it to her than actually falling in love with him. So she decides that she's going to go away with him, and she writes letters to her family. And the evening of, she is at home sitting by a window, leaning into the window, just pondering of everything that's happened. And the author really emphasizes the point that she's leaning into the window, because this is a significant detail within the story. Her leaning is kind of like looking into a new start. I think it shows her point of view changing, because as she's looking through the window, she is seeing the places she used to play as a child, and she's realizing that the neighbors she played with have now moved away, and she's watching people walk home, and just the day is coming to an end. And this point of view is changing, and I think she's starting to accept the changes, and she realizes reality and the course that it has taken. And she's now understanding that. And as critics of James Joyce's work have discovered, is Eveline, one interpretation is Eve, E-V-E, plus lean, L-E-A-N, to get the name Eveline. And Eve is twilight, kind of like meaning life. And if you think about it, at twilight, you have the day coming to an end, starting the night, which is like the birth of the night, the life that you have. And I think that's kind of showing the life that Eveline wants and her desires for that. And then you have lean, which means a slim chance to unlikely events happen. And that is kind of showing the unlikeliness of her dreams to pull through. And that's really significant in the story, because her name is almost foreshadowing the events that are going to occur. That night, she goes to meet Frank at the boats, and she is standing behind the railing to get on. And Frank gets on, and the captain is saying, it's time to sail away. And he's yelling at her to follow, and she just becomes immovable. She is stuck, once again, leaning over the railing. Where she is at is the life she's in, and leaning into it would be her dreams that lie ahead of her. And she just becomes like a statue. She loses everything, and she even loses recognition of Frank, who she's supposed to be in love with, standing on the boat as he is calling to her to follow, which she obviously does not do. And in that moment is the sacrifice that she makes, and from then on she is to face the consequences thereof. Here, the reader can look at it and say that, she sacrificed for her family, that she did it for the love of her family, and she has a new point of view and happiness of her life. But I think the point that Joyce was making here is her fear overcame that, and it was more powerful than the risk she was willing to take for her dreams. That she was too fearful, and she didn't have the confidence and the self-fulfillment to go after them. That overcame it, and that sacrifice she made was the loss of the love that she had and the ability to fall in love with Frank. And both of these authors show the sacrifices and that the consequences they have to make. I think at the time that they wrote these, they were trying to teach more of a lesson. And opposed to entertaining the reader with such a story, because they both kind of have a tragic ending, it was to make the reader question and rhetorically relate to their lives and how they would have to sacrifice and gain, because you have to lose to gain. And I think that's what the authors were trying to convey. Research has shown that both of these authors wrote their story based on personal events. Hawthorne getting married, and Joyce actually had a personal event of falling in love with a sailor. And I think it's reflecting them, and they're trying to share their experiences on with others. Both of these stories are great in character development. As James Joyce shows, and Eveline, she was unable to accept the reality. She saw it, but in the end, she didn't have the courage and the strength to accept reality and move forward with change. I think she was used to being in the comfort of her home and confiding in her father, just kind of like telling her what to do and having to go by the schedule. She didn't have the choice or the ability to make her own decisions. That free agency was gone kind of from her. And I think she was used to that, and she was fearful of the future and taking change, which is why she looked at everything as being a young child playing. And Hawthorne, on the other hand, Almer could not get past his obsession. He was passionately in love with science more than he was with anything else, and he just thought he had the ability to make everything perfect, but he didn't. And the sacrifice he was willing to make was the love, and now he is alone with, yes, success, that he got it to go away, but he is now killed life. And he really did separate the spirit from matter, because Georgiana is now gone from her body. And both of these authors are great in showing development and the consequences that can happen of a sacrifice. And I think that was their main idea and point of the story.